As we work to care for ourselves and appreciate our own worth, we all deserve a touch of elegance or even luxury from time to time. Yet, treating ourselves can often feel like an indulgence we should avoid. And that's why I was delighted to discover Quince, a brand that marries luxury with affordability. Imagine slipping into a 100% Mongolian cashmere sweater for just $50, or dressing up in washable silk tops and dresses. They also have organic cotton sweaters and even 14-karat gold jewelry. And the best part is that all items are priced 50 to 80% less than similar brands. How do they do it? Well, Quince partners directly with top factories, eliminating costly middlemen, and passes those savings right back to us. Plus, they only work with factories that uphold safe, ethical, and responsible manufacturing practices using premium materials. I personally love their silk blouses and cashmere sweaters. They've become staples in my own wardrobe, and I just feel so confident and comfortable and well cared for when I'm wearing them. Give yourself the luxury you deserve with Quince. Visit quince.com/bestofyou for free shipping on your order and 365-day returns. That's QUINCE.com/bestofyou to enjoy free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/bestofyou. Hey everyone, I'm Dr. Allison, and I'm so glad you're here to discover what brings out the best of you. This podcast is all about breaking free from painful patterns, mending the past, and discovering our true selves in God. I can't wait to get started as we learn together how to become the best version of who we are with God's help. Hey everyone, and welcome back to this week's episode of the Best of You podcast. I couldn't be more thrilled to share with you today's conversation with Dan Allender. Dan is a hero of mine, and for so many of us in this field of trying to bring together the best of psychology with faith and Christian spirituality. Dan is just a trailblazer in the field of counseling, especially known for his groundbreaking work in the book, The Wounded Heart. Adam Young refers to the significant role that Dan's book, The Wounded Heart, played in his journey in last week's episode 147. And he's also played such a significant role in training Christian therapists. Dan is a pioneer of a unique and innovative approach to trauma and abuse therapy called the Allender theory, which has brought healing and transformation to hundreds of thousands of lives by bridging the story of the gospel and the stories of trauma and abuse that mark so many. And many of you are probably familiar with his work at the Allender Center, which is part of the Seattle School of Theology and Psychology. The far-reaching impact of Dan's work on so many of us seeking to combine Christian theology with psychology cannot be overstated. It's just incredible. And to my delight, I discovered that the day on which Dan and I recorded today's episode was in fact his 48th wedding anniversary. And he's just such an authentic, true soul. And so he opens up right away telling me about a fight he and his wife of 48 years had on the eve of their anniversary. And that's what I loved about this conversation and about this brand new book that Dan has written. It's called The Deep-Rooted Marriage: Cultivating Intimacy, Healing, and Delight. It's just filled with really honest stories. He doesn't mince words. He's a truth teller. And in our conversation today, he shares some new stories about his own marriage, and he talks about how he and his wife have learned over these 48 years how to uncover the deep roots of trauma in each of their individual lives and how those deep roots impacts their ongoing interactions with each other. This is just such a powerful episode. I particularly love his challenge at the end of the episode to all couples about what he would like all couples to know about the reality of what it means to leave one's family of origin and cleave to your new partner, and how important that is to the health of your marriage. And he also shares at the end of the episode just some personal reflections on his own 48 years of marriage. He had me laughing. He had me crying throughout this episode. And I'm just thrilled to bring you my conversation with one of my heroes in this field, Dan Allender. I have tears in my eyes. You've just been such an amazing mentor, role model to so many of us in this field through your books, through just your presence. And I'm just so thrilled to get to have this conversation with you today. I feel so honored and so privileged.
Well, me too. Again, these are the kind of things where you go, people don't realize how fun this is.
Yeah, we put on these headsets but really it's just our modern way of getting to connect
Yeah, I prefer, in a nice coffee shop.
Me
But
too.
it's hard to bring in a few hundred other people or 1,000 or whatever.
Yeah. Well, this new book, there's so many things we could talk about, Dan, but I was just saying before we started recording, I love what you're doing, you and your co-author, Steve, bringing in this lens really of trauma into marriage. And you write about it so beautifully. It's so, in many ways, intuitive. We know we bring our baggage into marriage, but the way that you're speaking into this current moment where a lot of us are aware more and more of our baggage. Well, how then does it affect our most significant relationships? So would you just share a little bit, Dan? I would love if you would start, like you do in the book, with a little bit of your own story and some of your own stuff that you unwittingly realized, oh my goodness, this is now coming into my marriage.
Well, first and foremost, Allison, what a delight to be with you. So, the reality is people see often therapists or people who write books as sort of those who kind of have it all together and therefore want to offer from their vaunted high standing the glory that we would wish other people to participate in. But last night, Becky and I, my wife today of 48 years, our fight was over whether a baked potato was actually fit to eat, whether it was done. And we're in it. I mean, we're in it. We're in it far enough that all of a sudden you realize, oh my God, are we actually having not a knockdown drag out, but not a pleasant interaction? So I think in some ways to begin this process, as we've been married 48 years, it's getting worse and it's getting better. And I think that's the key often to a good marriage. Like I would say there has never been for me with any other human being more of a taste of what I believe eternity, what heaven will be like. But I'd also say with no other human being have I ever had such a taste of hell. And again, to hold that and to be able to say, I think what we have written is a good book. But it's an honest book about the reality that no matter how well prepared, thoughtful, educated you may be, your marriage is one of the hardest relationships. And certainly it's meant to be one of the best relationships you'll ever be in.
I love the honesty. There's this quote toward the end of the book that I just thought was so good about, essentially, it's about war. And you say, it is not likely at your wedding that the officiant said a war had to be fought for these two to be at this altar. Even more unlikely is that they'd continue. And now, in fact, there will commence an even greater war. It is a very hopeful book. But that reality testing pushes so much against our culture, even especially in the last century in American culture, what we've come to understand as love. And yet so loving between you and your wife. Just some beautiful moments that bring you to tears.
Oh, thank you. It's again, there's no relationship, as I've said, that matters more to me. And yet, if you were to see the interaction over a freaking baked potato, you'd go, what in the name of God is wrong with this couple? And the answer is, well, the reality of brokenness, the reality of sin, the reality of our own stories play out in every arena, but particularly for some reason, our kitchen. And so the ground of engagement, to the degree we don't have language to name what's actually happening, we're even lost in the fog. Again, I think we're clearer about what happens than we may have been 5 or 10 or 20 years ago. But that only gives you then the access to begin the process of humbling, honoring, blessing, and engaging the other for the ultimate purpose of drawing one another to be more like Jesus. If that's not the goal, I get it. I get it. I like comfort. I like convenience. But marriage is the great character transformation place.
Yeah, that word, humble yourself, that word, making conscious choices. You talk, there's a fight you tell in the story in front of the fridge. So it sounds like it might not be unlike the baked potato fight.
Yeah, I'm telling you, we've had, since COVID, I would say 80% of our conflict has happened in the space of our kitchen.
So let's talk about it, Dan, because you talk in the book very candidly, at least in your own life, about where some of that comes from. And here's the thing that's interesting, 48 years in, you can have all this self-knowledge and know, because in the book you talk about as a kid, food scarcity, the way that it triggers you. You can know all that. Your spouse can know all that, but still in that moment, you can get hijacked by that young part of you. It's not that it stops happening. It's what you do with it when it does.
I love that. It's so important to underscore that. And, when we, again, divide our brain in terms of left and right hemisphere, and again, it's too general, but there's some truth to the fact that our left hemisphere is much more logical, linear, able to, in one sense, quote unquote, think. Our right hemisphere is far more affective, far more visual, far more affected, at least we know, by the reality of trauma. So what happens? And I love your word, hijacked. We got hijacked over whether or not the fork went deep enough into the baked potato to warrant being said to be done. I didn't think it was. She did. The kitchen has been the realm where my wife has felt both her deepest pleasure and power. And it's been the realm for me of a lot of warfare. And to begin, just the category that my mother was borderline personality disordered. She was eccentric. She was incredibly powerful. She could be weak as a frail being, and you never knew what moment, but food was never her realm. And she didn't care whether or not we had food to eat or not. So a normal meal of mushy canned peas, wretched corn, and ham baked on one side and pretty much raw on the other. That was actually a pretty big, good meal. The rest were Swanson TV dinners. Becky's world was a world in which she had a pretty vicious and cruel mom, but who loved to cook. So the kitchen was the one place where love was shown. So when I walk into the kitchen, at some level, the haunting presence is, this is a war zone. And for Becky, it's a world of love and lush and delight, smell, good flavor. And for me to in any way question or have any significant influence in the kitchen, oh my gosh. For some people, it's a bedroom. Again, not to say that we have not had our own sexual struggles with both of us having histories of past abuse, but the kitchen, it's a lot of struggle.
Even when you're describing that, so what's happening there? And I think about it through an IFS lens. You talk a lot about the brain in the book. There's so many different ways to look at this, but it's almost like parts of you when you walk in that kitchen, no matter how much work you've done, there's some stored memory. There's some stored memory. It's just in you. And so to this day, sometimes that comes up. And so there's a couple of questions in that. One is we can try to just kind of every time I go in the kitchen, just know, okay, I've got to just be on my best behavior because, the willpower thing, right? Like this is it. I've got to, but sometimes that can make it worse or.
Oh, I think it inevitably always makes it worse because the pressure you put on yourself to escape what you perceive to be judgment only creates much more sensitivity to it.
So if we can't do that, then we're just going to have to acknowledge from time to time, this is going to happen. We're going to erupt. So how do you and Becky do that? Do you just know that together?
Well, we didn't last night, at least until it got ridiculous. Again, without going through the entire dialogue, there was a point we started laughing because it was just ridiculous that we're having what seems to be a significant war on the eve of our 48th anniversary over a baked potato. But in the moment, and I think it's such an important category to understand about trauma, that there are triggers. Even if these events are 10, 20, 30, 40 years ago, our brain is wired for safety. And when we have a sense of threat, even if it's not conscious, there is going to be a biological process of stress, chemical production. Cortisol is the one that most people know about, but adrenaline, noradrenaline, catecholamines, they're all working at that moment. And I'm being flooded with stress biochemicals over something that just doesn't matter. Like, just put ketchup on that baked potato. It'll be fine. So to be able to have language, to be able then to go, oh, we're both getting triggered here. Oh, this is not the direction we thought
Yes.
dinner would go. But then instead of just like being conciliatory, like, oh, I'm sorry. Oh, I'm sorry. Forgive me. Yes, let's have dinner. That's good. I'm not by any means saying that's not helpful, but to be able to go, wow, what just came online for you and for me? So a good portion of our discussion was going back to stories we've told one another multiple times and news stories about the reality of what gets triggered in that moment. The more you understand the context, the roots of what's flooding you, the better you can be on behalf of the other, bringing both compassion and kindness, but also curiosity. Like, gosh, was there other things going on in the day that brought us to this point? And for us, we couldn't come up with anything other than I was standing in the realm of where my wife feels like she gets to lavish me with goodness. And I was questioning her. And was I? Yeah. But again, whether the baked potato was truly done or not, but you can imagine whether it's about sex, whether it's about finances, whether it's about where you vacation, almost every area is going to have the realm of difference. And difference for most of us triggers a sense of threat. Rather than warm, engaged curiosity, we feel challenged or we feel threatened. And that now brings us into how do you manage, in the broadest sense of the word, any sense of threat? And I'm much more of stress-oriented fight. My wife is far more stress-oriented flight. So the fight-flight response of trauma has, in the initial first, 5 years, it worked really well for us until she began to mature and began to name my bluster and verbosity and intensity as not just intimidating, but contrary to the man I claim I want to be. So as we began to grow together, let's just say growth itself always has at its core a transformation that feels more dangerous than whatever the status quo was.
It's deep, hence the title of the book, The Deep-Rooted Marriage. I want to talk about something that we all need, but often take for granted. That's clean drinking water. Like many of you, I'm always on the lookout for ways to ensure my family and I are drinking the healthiest water possible. Did you know that 3 out of 4 homes in America have harmful contaminants in their tap water? That's why I switched to AquaTrue. AquaTrue water purifiers use a sophisticated 4-stage reverse osmosis process that requires no installation. I love that it just sits right on the countertop. It's designed to remove more than 84 of the most harmful contaminants, including PFAs, also known as forever chemicals, which are found in almost 45% of U.S. tap water. I love how the AquaTrue purifier is so easy to use and maintain. The filters last anywhere from 6 months to 2 years, which means less hassle and more savings. Plus, it's portable. I can take it anywhere, which makes it perfect for apartments or even college dorm rooms. And let me just say, the water tastes fantastic. It's not just filtered, it's purified. AquaTrue comes with a 30-day money-back guarantee and even makes a great gift. Today, my listeners receive 20% off any AquaTrue purifier. Just go to aquatrue.com, that's AQUATRU.com, and enter code BESTOFYOU at checkout. That's 20% off any AquaTrue water purifier when you go to aquatrue.com and use promo code BESTOFYOU. In my years of being a therapist, one of the lessons I've learned is that not everybody benefits from a traditional 50-minute hour or even from typical weekly counseling sessions. This is why some people can go to couples counseling for months or even years and never really get anywhere or make any progress. This is why I'm such a believer in the intensive counseling process at Restoring the Soul in Colorado. Restoring the Soul was created by Michael Cusick to help couples or individuals experience deep change in half-day blocks over 1 or 2 weeks. Michael and his extraordinary team of therapists know that sometimes you just can't wait months or years to get to the bottom of an issue or to experience a needed breakthrough. For over 20 years, Restoring the Soul has helped couples and individuals transform their relationships and their lives. So if you're looking to get out of the rut you're in but can't wait months or years, contact Restoring the Soul today at www.restoringthesoul.com and learn how their intensive counseling process can jumpstart your journey or launch you to the place you want to be. And as a special gift just for the Best of You podcast listeners, make sure to visit www.restoringthesoul.com/bestofyou to download their PDF called 5 Ways Unresolved Trauma May Be Derailing Your Relationship. That's www.restoringthesoul.com/bestofyou. Okay, so Dan, the good news for the listener is it's worth it. The reality news is we're going to be doing this. And one of the things I like about your book, let me just say it this way. I often find it hard to figure out referrals for couples in therapy because there's a lot of false promises. There's a lot of if you do this, this will happen, scripts, tips, those kinds of things that can be helpful. But in those moments that you described that happened last night, it almost always involves these childhood parts of us. It just does. And so there's this adaptation of IFS. It's called Intimacy from the Inside Out. And one of the things I do, are you familiar with it? It's one of the ones I actually think is really powerful because you don't solve anything. What you do is you find compassion for your spouse. Just to your point, what was happening for you? And you are kind of recognizing that young part of me. I want that young part of me to be with me, but because I'm complex and because sometimes that young part of me shows up in the kitchen, it means that sometimes this thing happens. And then each spouse, and you talk it through so beautifully in the book, both you and Becky and your co-author and his wife kind of give your different viewpoints of the argument. For example, let's say at the fridge where you kind of walk us through what was happening to that young boy inside of you like you just did. And then Becky says, and I was like, this is dumb. In her part, she's kind of like, I could double down on knock it off, but then kind of the Lord works on her pride. And then it's like, maybe I just need to get curious. And there's something here that is sort of the magic of intimacy, of love, of marriage that doesn't necessarily take away those rough patches.
Again, what I love, if there's a portion of the Bible that I would say I go to often, it'd be Romans chapter 8, that begins with, there is no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus. And what if there was no condemnation in the context of our marriage? Now, that's not the case, but what if? And just the imagination of what if there was a way of engaging one another with hurt, with difference, with struggle, but without contempt, without condemnation. And that's where I would say we're not a contempt-free marriage, but it's one of our intentions. And whatever you make as an intention, here's the craziness. It exposes where you're not becoming what you intend, but it also creates the pathway for it to become more and more a portion of your life. And so I want to have a contempt-free marriage. We fight, we argue, we see things differently on almost every spectrum. Nonetheless, it's actually fun. It's actually entertaining. There are moments that her differences just knock me off my rocker to a point where it's like, I don't know how you married me. I think it's one of the best con jobs I ever pulled off in my whole life to get this beautiful, remarkable woman to marry me. Yet, back to that image, there have been harsh moments where we feel the name Satan meaning the accuser, the devil from the Greek word diabolos, meaning the one who divides. We've felt accusation. We've felt division, and it always brings to the surface, as you put it so well, the younger parts of us that either knew developmental trauma, which everybody does, but also very unique trauma. She had a significantly emotionally abusive mother. She has her own history of past abuse, which I'm allowed to say because it's been part of her story she's publicly shared. Same with mine. So having a mom who was consuming, as my mom was, who I described her even as like a seventh grader, as I felt like I was living in the web of a black widow spider. And I just had to make sure I didn't move, or if I did move, I created enough trauma in the web that the spider would move away. So when you've got a woman, my wife, who lived by hiding literally in closets to avoid the rage of her mother, and me lighting things on fire, stealing cars, selling drugs, creating havoc in my world, in part to keep my mother at bay. Well, you've got a drama. I don't hide in closets. She does. She doesn't burn things down. I do. Now, if you take that into the description of the younger parts of us that found very different ways to not just survive, but to find something that gave us even just that modicum, even that moment of life. Now it becomes clearer in the context of a normal fight why I'm loud, why she's stonewalling. Well, again, that interplay, you can stop and go, you need to learn how to communicate better. Yes, indeed. But if we don't deal with the heart, then the stricture of certain skills becomes the moral gospel rather than the gospel of there is no condemnation.
I have very legalistically, as a trained therapist, said the correct words to my husband to let him know that I know what we should be saying in this moment to not be in conflict. And it doesn't go over very well.
No, I'm hoping he's at least some point said to you, you're not my therapist, and I don't pay you.
It's the most humbling. It's like, oh, he would actually love it if I'd get mad instead, because it's all about the heart. But to your point, my heart is like very pious in those moments, which is not, I guess I'll just finish my sentence, which is not that's leading to contempt.
Yes, exactly. Oh, so well said.
What do you think then is the key attribute in each individual that has to be cultivated to transform what can be hell, what can be a war, into these moments of glory?
Oh, gosh. I often go back to the Luke 7 passage about dealing with the log in your own eye. And sadly, we think of the word log as it's sin. But it's anything that keeps you from being able to see well. So to have compassion for a young 4 and 5-year-old who's having to hide in a closet, it breaks my heart. And yet, so often, including the baked potato, it would so interactive in a way in which I'm literally sort of sending her back into the closet. For me to realize I'm replicating some of the same harm she endured as a young child just breaks my heart. So I think the capacity to look at the log in your own eye and to say with kindness to those young parts, this is how you survived. You learned to be verbose. You learned to talk loud. You learned to talk quickly in order to keep a woman who might have eaten you at bay. So when we begin with a phrase like Romans chapter 2, verse 4, it is the kindness of God that leads to repentance. The question is, can we join God in kindness for the young parts of our own heart, let alone our partner? In which case, then, what you find is kindness is not niceness. It's not even pleasantness. It's the capacity to see the other with eyes that are full of truth and yet are wrapped up in compassion. Therefore, offers true curiosity, not interrogation, but true curiosity, like God in the garden when he says, "Where are you, Adam?" And again, the question that I sometimes ask couples, how do you hear that phrase? Because how you hear it will determine so much of your response. Are you being accused or are you being invited? And the idea that we could be in our own pain and suffering and yet invite our spouse into an engagement where there's honor and ultimately the goal of delight, I think it changes the tonality, let alone the content of our interactions.
So it reminds me of, you open the book with a scene on a ski slope. You're pretty angry, primarily at your younger son. I won't take everybody through the whole story, but you're worked up. This is early in your marriage. And what you're saying reminds me of that moment that you described where your wife calls out the better angels of your nature through strength.
Yes, I was told by my wife to ski down about 200 yards. Get out. You're trying to get your son down by force and power. It's not working. Go on down. So I came back up when it became clear that her empathetic and gracious, kind way was leaving him now on the ground. So I had to come back 200, 300 yards, and I was boiling angry yet cold as ice inside. And as I put my skis on and made my move toward the two of them, she skied in front of him. And it was clear that she's protecting our insecure son. And I just mouthed to her the word move. And she shook her head very kindly. No force, just like, no. And when I got to her and I'm like, move, she put her hand on my heart and she said the words, I know the men who have humiliated you. And right there, I mean, I am not expecting my life story to be brought in one sentence to bear. I'm literally, that sense of being haunted, like my father, a coach, several pastors. I mean, all of a sudden, the top of the slope, it's busy and there are people there. And then she said, and I know that's not what you want to bring to your son. Again, I would wish that each and every time there has been some truth like that my heart had softened. But at that moment, tears came. And all I experienced was her hand even more firmly on my heart. And she said, and you're a good man. And then skied away, leaving my son and I on the top of that slope to negotiate how would we get down. And I would say it's been, again, one of those stories that is a family story. My son tells that story. My daughters who had left to go down and get lunch early, though they weren't part of it, they were part of it because they have known something of my own failure as a father. So all that to say, without being the face of God on behalf of one another, who do we become? And that's what a marriage, from my standpoint, is the gift of. You get to be the face of God on behalf of your spouse. And my wife's face was disruptive, was inviting, but also called me to be who I claim I wish to be.
I love that story. I love that moment. My guess is there are moments when you've had to do that for her in different ways. So there's a couple of things going on. That softens you. That what happens through this long journey. You're 48 years. Did I hear you correctly that it's today?
Yeah, today.
This is amazing. Happy anniversary, 48th anniversary. That's amazing. So 48 years, moments like that start to crack open the hardness around the heart, right? It doesn't mean that magically you became the world's best husband or parent, just as I'm sure moments for her. It's a long journey, but it cracked open. And so then you have the capacity now. Something shifts inside of you, right? So there are those moments where a spouse kind of holds up that mirror of God, right? I get that part of it. And you lay that out so beautifully in the book. But again, back to these moments where we're both in our worst self. I mean, I'm kind of thinking this through because marriage it's such a dance and there's so many different facets of it. So there are those moments that are so powerful. I have those with my husband where it's like, oh my gosh, he just cracked something open inside of me that's never going to change. I mean, I still have to work it out, but something shifted.
Yes, absolutely.
And I know I've done that for him. Then we have those baked potato moments still. I'm just intrigued by this, right? How do you make sense of that? You go back to that moment, you're like, something shifted in me. How does that then, I guess I'm trying to get at the dance of the marriage, the being seen, the being witnessed changes you. It changes her. You each grow individually, but then you're also constantly coming back to each other with all those new things in motion. It's not static.
No, but again, certain themes play out pretty predictably. Like I am the messy one. Oh my gosh. And Becky is so orderly. But again, she had to be to escape the wrath of a mother who would have found fault if a piece of paper were on her desk and not being utilized at that moment. Whereas chaos was part of my camouflage to escape something of the pursuit of my mother. So again, I'm not here to blame my mother or my father or her mother or father. Understand that all of us, generation by generation, all the way back to Adam and Eve, we all have trauma. And we all have often managed that trauma by a kind of survival structure that's deeply broken, sometimes still showing a lot of beauty. Can we just stop long enough to go, this is heartbreaking, and I understand it.
Yeah.
And can it be used for good? can it be used for good? I've created, and I say with some grief, but also some pleasure, I've created a lot of complexity for the believing community, asking people to deal with sexual abuse back in the mid-'80s. I'm proud of that. I'm proud of being able to have listened to my clients and written, and there are a lot of people who hate my guts. I'm not thrilled with that, but if part of the adversarial interaction with my own mother gave me some basic structure for being able to have some thickness of skin to bear, well, there's some beauty to that. Unfortunately, the one person in the world who matters most to me oftentimes gets the prickly, angry part. Yet, because we both have language and experience, an important phrase, we have shared lots of stories, not facts, stories of the harm that we each have endured. That begins to create a kind of connection on the basis of compassion that allows you to not just understand, but intervene on behalf of one another more quickly. We had a traffic situation, and I was starting to, she said, people are carrying guns. I'm not ready for you to be shot, not today. And her humor, her playfulness, her exposure of my anger. And I'm like, yeah, you're right. People are carrying guns more often. It's an angrier world. And I don't think I want to get shot today. So it's something that could have been felt on my part like, that was not very respectful. She's mocking me. It's like, no. She is playfully, prophetically exposing, inviting. We were able to laugh about that interaction and the baked potato eventually. And when you are able to, in one sense, escape the worst parts, well, there's much more gratitude. But I think what you were naming earlier is there are times where both of us are awful. I mean, those are the moments where one has to come back and say, I don't really understand all that occurred, but I know I harmed you. I know I feel harmed by you. How do we hold together from the vows we made and from the dreams we have of how we want our lives to end? You need to know the alpha and you need to know the omega in order to deal with the middle. And a lot of our messes are middle messes.
Are you tired of searching for a skincare product that actually delivers on its promises? I've been there. Trying product after product labeled as clean or non-toxic, only to find hidden ingredients or zero results. That's why I'm thrilled to share Purity Woods with you. Their mission is simple: to provide the cleanest and most effective healthy aging products on the market. Their products are USDA certified organic, non-GMO, free of artificial additives, parabens, and toxic preservatives, and they're completely cruelty-free. Their age-defying Dream Cream is a game changer. With revolutionary maple leaf extract and over 25 potent ingredients, it helps reduce fine lines, wrinkles, and age spots while supporting collagen and elastin production, all without irritation or drying. Turn back time on the appearance of your skin with Purity Woods Age-Defying Dream Cream. Right now, Purity Woods is offering 17% off site-wide, and we have an exclusive additional 10% discount for our listeners. That's a total savings of 27%. Go to puritywoods.com/bestofyou or enter code bestofyou at checkout for an additional 10% off your first order. That's PURITYWOODS.com and enter code bestofyou for a total of 27% off your first order.
Are your ulcerative colitis symptoms proving difficult to manage? Tremfya guselkumab can help you manage the cycle of UC symptoms. At 1 year, many patients taking Tremfya achieved clinical remission, and some patients also achieved endoscopic remission. Individual results may vary. Tremfya is a prescription medicine used to treat adults with moderately to severely active ulcerative colitis. Serious allergic reactions and increased risk of infections may occur. Before treatment, your doctor should check you for infections and TB. Tell your doctor if you have an infection, flu-like symptoms, or if you need a vaccine. Ask your doctor if Tremfya can help you manage the cycle of UC symptoms. Call 1-800-526-7736 to learn more or visit tremfyaradio.com.
My husband and I have to your point about story, which is such a theme in the book. When we have one of those where we just both go somewhere we don't even get, we call it a Seinfeld. It's an episode about nothing. And it worked. We both go, oh my gosh, that was a Seinfeld. We don't even know what that was about. And we then can laugh about it. But there's a category for it. There's a naming. But Dan, while you were talking, I got tears listening to it. And here's where I hear the hope in this. Because marriage is hard. And you're so honest about that. And here's where I hear the hope. When you said that about the part of you, and I'm going to take you off the spot for a second. So the part of me, you're talking about anger, and you're so honest about that. The part of me that's a people pleaser, that my husband gets the good of that part when he sees me be kind, to our kids. He was a widower when we met, and just take in, our kids now, but his kids, the empathy. He fell in love with that part of me. And also, well into marriage, boy, does he get the worst of the codependency, of the people pleasing. He sees the worst of it. It's the heaven and hell. And as an individual, I can just be like, why can't I get rid of this part? And I know I'm not supposed to think that way, but I still do sometimes. But what you're saying is this is love. Love is over time. Yes, I do get some of the worst of those parts, but I also get the best. And I'm willing to stick it out to see more and more of the best. And I'm willing to stick it out to see more and more of when you're able to go, yeah, that was the worst. That's the hope, is that being seen in all of the glory of those parts also demands that we're going to be seen in the worst of it. That's powerful.
To me, it's the end of Romans 8, where there's nothing that can divide us from the love of God in Christ Jesus, neither death nor life, nor angels, nor powers, nor principalities, etc. So when you begin to go, oh, we have hurt one another so deeply at times, and in those moments, I won't go into all the details, but my wife had 3 miscarriages in our early years. And whenever one of our friends, younger friends, is in the middle of a miscarriage, the two of us look at one another with a look like, oh, that is still heartbroken, barren ground, where my inattentiveness to what she was going through in that loss, I go, who were you? How could you? And yet, the reality of how our culture has come to own the effect of miscarriage today, I'm not excusing myself. I'm simply saying that we are meant to grow through the community that grows in an understanding of heartache and loss and yet goodness. So when we hold something of our past together, there's forgiveness. Oh, yeah, but there's still joint suffering we can enter. But it's without accusation. It's without demand, without fear. Nothing can separate us. That's the ultimate desire we're meant to know in a marriage. Now, will we get close? Yeah, closer, but ever to a point where, as 1 John 3 says, when we see him, then we will be as he is. Until that day, again, the radical notion of sanctification is the more we grow, the more we see how far we have to grow. So it's not American democracy, capitalism. The more you get, the more you have. It's the more you see, the more you're aware of, I want redemption to be the deepest reality of how I engage not just my wife, but my children, my grandchildren, the granddogs, 3 granddogs. All to say, when I had children, I kind of knew there might be a day with grandchildren. Nobody told me about granddogs and tending to them while they vacationed. So all to say, none of us really ever fully understood what we were getting into. Yet the more we're in it, the more is that, I can't believe we get to love one another as we do.
That's beautiful. I never thought about that sanctification process. The closer we get to God, the more we see our need for him, which is hard, but it would apply to marriage. But the beauty part is you're also seeing your spouse, your significant other see that you're with them in it. You're not bypassing it. You're not just saying, oh, no, it's fine. You're saying, yeah, yeah. There were some really rough patches. And also, here we are. Before we wind up, because I want to honor your time, this part of the book hit me, and I just want to get your thoughts on it. We've touched on this, but I want to circle back to it. I just thought this was so powerful. You write, as much as I loved Becky, I was more loyal to the role and demands of my family As much as Becky loved me, she was more loyal. You were more to the demands of your mother. As much as Becky loved me, she was more loyal to being the bright sunlight for her father. We didn't know it. And so you're part of this becoming one. And it's so cliche, but there's so much depth to how you write about it in the book, is leaving those family of origin patterns that are so strong. I mean, 48 years in, they're still there. You're having to leave. And it really resonated. You talked about how early on, the thing that attracted you about each other, the thing that attracts you about this person, I get to leave these things in my family of origin, might become the thing that you then dislike because you actually have to change.
Yes. I love how you put it. It's like, this has been one of those moments where we go, you put it so brilliantly and clearly. What do you want me to do other than to go, amen, sister? Like, nobody, it's never going to be at a wedding. I remember I had the privilege of doing the officiation of all three of my children. And I remember sitting with one of them, and she said, look, Dad, you've done this a lot. You've had the privilege of marrying other people. What do you recommend for my future husband and I? And I said, well, at some point during the ceremony, I think you should turn to us. I'll go from the front, sit with Mom, and Driscoll, you look at your parents and say, thank you, thank you, thank you for all that you've given us. But from this moment on, as I turn my back on you, my loyalty no longer is to you, but to my spouse. And my daughter looked at me and she goes, it'd be the weirdest wedding in the world. I'm not going to do that. And I'm like, oh, yeah, I guess it would. Because nobody says that. Nobody comes even close to saying what the scriptures begin with. Leave your mother and father. Now, that's not geographic. It's not financial. Because what we know about the ancient Near East, it was an agrarian culture. You didn't leave and go to the city. Your finances were bound into the larger family. So it is a deeply, shall we say, interior psychological process. So right from the beginning, when you don't leave, the next portions of becoming one flesh, becoming one soul flesh together ain't going to work out. So I think much of what we're trying to do in the deep-rooted marriage is to invite people to look at structures of how they interact with the history of what the roots are that allow you that process to make this transformation. But as you put it so well, the passage and process is endless, but not hopeless. At times, I just find myself going, really? You didn't get this? Again, I think I've written 3 books on marriage, 2 with my best friend, Tremper Longman, and then with my dear friend, Steve Call. And I'm like, do you not get it? And I think it's part of the kindness of God that his response is, of course you don't, but you do. So let's move with what you do, but allow your heart to be open to what you don't see and have not named yet. And trauma experts will say we need to engage traumatic stories up to 30 times for there to be the neuroplasticity of our brain changing. So I think if one were to measure my cellular process, I think there have been immense changes in the last 48 years. And so much more. And that's why, as an older man married to an older woman, every day we walk about a 45-minute period. And it's our time to talk about the day, to pray, to laugh, to anticipate what the day holds. And the simple phrase of count your days. Becky and I don't know how much longer we will be on this earth. Count your days that you might grow in wisdom. So if what we want is a comfortable marriage, this is not a good book for you. But if what you want is something of the wild life of God, then I can't invite you any more than to what your spouse reveals about you and what your spouse reveals about your heart with God. And what a process. I mean, nobody could have told me when I made the vows I made 48 years ago today at about 4:30 Pacific Standard Time, 7:30 Eastern Standard Time, what I was getting myself into. But I would not trade it for a living second, not for billions of dollars. Now, ask me if I'd be willing to have my children again. It would take a second. Yes, the answer is yes, but give me a second. Much of my career, I wouldn't do it again. But my wife, yeah. would not be without a question.
I want to do another podcast episode on that. That's interesting. I love it. I got to tell you, it's so encouraging, but it's because it's so honest. And that's your gift, Dan. To your point, you have for years. That's why so many of us revere you. You talked about things before anybody else was talking about them. You said the hard things. And I get it. That's why it's so powerful now when you're like, that's great. People love me for that. And guess what? Here's the other side of it sometimes. Let my wife talk to you about that, right? But it's hopeful to me here in my age where I'm like, I've been writing books about codependency and boundaries, and I'm just going through a whole nother round of being horrible at it all. It's actually oddly hopeful to go, I'll have another iteration of it. As a grandparent, I'll have another iteration of it,
With grand dogs.
Yeah, with grand dogs. Life is never boring. And the joy of having someone like you and Becky to share the story. There's so many good stories in the book. Sometimes I laughed out loud. Before I go there, I want to ask you questions I ask all my guests, Dan. The first one is, what would you say to young, newly married Dan now? What would you say to him now from who you are now?
Hey, you got one of the most amazing human beings to marry you. And yes, you pulled this off. You lied to her directly. I mean, she said at one point, I can't wait someday to walk the Appalachian Trail. I didn't know what the Appalachian Trail was, but I said, oh my gosh, me too. If she said, I want to go to the moon, it'd be like, that's absolutely my dream. So yeah, I mean, courtship is hopefully beneficial lying without absolute cruelty. But you're on a journey that you cannot comprehend until you enter it. And even after you've been on it for 48 years, you can't imagine what's going to be required of you to die together. So you better know this is about life and death. It isn't just about owning a home or having children or having a nice vacation. This will shape you to be who you are and what you become for eternity. And you are not up for it. And you do not have the capacity, so you will have to depend upon me. I wish a good, wise, kind man or woman would have said that to me.
What's bringing out the best of you right now?
Well, here's the intersection. We've had such a good day so far. Early morning, we took our walk, and then we opened up our wedding photos. And it was just, again, it's not the first time, but we just laughed about where we were, what we saw. And about 2 hours later, we got the news that a dear, dear friend's wife has intractable and incurable cancer. And so when we got the news, we sat on a couch and wept, just wept together. So a day where you laugh and you weep is a good anniversary.
Oh, I love that. That's beautiful. Yeah. And you do it together. That's beautiful. Dan, thank you so much. Where can people find the book?
I'm not that fond of Amazon or its owner, but let's just say Amazon's probably the quickest place to be able to get the book. But Allison, thank you. Your wisdom is very deep and sweet. So to join you in that, it's a great honor.
It's been a pleasure. I hope we get to do it again. And bless you on your anniversary. Blessings to Becky. Thanks, Dan. Thank you for joining me for this week's episode of The Best of You. It would mean so much if you take a moment to subscribe. You can go to Apple, Spotify, Amazon Music, or wherever you listen to podcasts and click the plus or follow button. That will ensure you don't miss an episode and it helps get the word out to others. While you're there, I'd love it if you leave your 5-star review. I look forward to seeing you back here next Thursday. And remember, as you become the best of who you are, you honor God, you heal others, and you stay true to your God-given self.